The murder of an upcoming rapper over his diss track and a 67-year-old man gunned down for being in the wrong part of town are just two murders allegedly linked to T-Roy, one of the most notorious figures of Chicago's gang wars. This video will show you how T-Roy, best friend of the infamous rapper and alleged killer King Von, left behind a host of bodies that added to his murderous reputation. Dale Fisher, aka Squirrel. On December 3, 2011, the streets of Chicago witnessed a brutal and senseless act of violence that would mark the beginning of a chilling series of events. Dale Fisher, known to his friends as Squirrel, was walking with a companion to a corner store near 62nd and St. Lawrence. It was a typical day in the neighborhood, but what happened next was anything but ordinary. A silver two-door car pulled up beside them, and without warning, someone leaned out of the window and opened fire. Dale was hit multiple times, collapsing on the sidewalk as his friend fled for safety. The aftermath of the shooting was as harrowing as the act itself. Someone took a graphic picture of Dale's lifeless body lying on the sidewalk, a reminder of the harsh realities of life on the streets of Chicago. Dale was rushed to Stroger Hospital, but despite the efforts of medical staff, he was pronounced dead about half an hour later. Police reports indicated that Dale had been shot a total of 12 times, a clear indication of the shooter's intent to kill. Dale Fisher's death sent shockwaves through his community. According to his friends and family, Dale was not a gang member. He preferred spending his time at a youth center rather than getting involved in the dangerous street life that claimed so many young lives. His family had moved away from the Washington Park and Woodlawn area to the Chatham neighborhood, hoping to escape the violence. However, Dale still visited his old neighborhood to hang out with friends, some of whom were affiliated with local gangs that were enemies of O-Block. These gangs included STL on St. Lawrence Avenue, EBT on 64th and Eberhart, and Jarrow City on 62nd, along with factions like FYB and FBG. Despite the numerous rumors and speculations, Dale's killer was never caught. Several factions and suspects were rumored to be involved. In 2012, Richie Jerk, brother of rapper Billionaire Black, implicated the Lamron set in Dale's murder. Another popular suspect was D Rose from the 600 set, closely allied with O-Block. However, one name that repeatedly came up was T-Roy, a feared member of O-Block. Some speculated that this could have been the first of as many as 10 murders he committed for his gang. There were claims that T-Roy couldn't have been involved as he might have been incarcerated at the time, but these claims were never substantiated. The case received a crucial update during the trial for the murder of FBG Duck. An alleged cooperator, FBG Butter, told investigators that Dale was indeed killed by T-Roy and D Rose. While the case was never definitively solved, federal prosecutors naming T-Roy as a killer in their paperwork spoke volumes. This murder was only the first of many rumored killings in which T-Roy was thought to have played a role. His alleged involvement in Dale Fisher's murder marked the beginning of a violent spree that would leave a trail of bodies and a legacy of fear in Chicago's gangland. King Doc. Marlon Monroe, known as Doc or King Doc, was walking near 63rd and St. Lawrence, deep within STL's territory. The night was typical for the area, but what transpired next would add another chapter to the gloomy narrative of gang violence. As Doc approached a corner store, someone opened fire, hitting him once in the chest. Despite his efforts to escape, Doc's injuries were fatal. He managed to cross the road and stumbled through a patch of tall weeds in an empty lot in the 6300 block of St. Lawrence, where he ultimately succumbed to his injuries. The police arrived on the scene to investigate reports of gunfire, but were unable to locate Doc's body, concealed as it was in the tall weeds. It wasn't until hours later that Doc's relative, a teenage boy named Modell McCray, stumbled upon his body while passing through the empty lot on his way home. The discovery was a devastating blow to Doc's family and friends, who had hoped he was turning his life around. Doc's family described him as a man who had been going through a rough patch, but was making efforts to change his life. He had recently been released from prison, a milestone he celebrated on social media. During his time behind bars, Doc had obtained his GED and was planning to get a painter's license to earn an honest living. On the night he was killed, Doc had been doing maintenance work at his aunt's property, proof of his commitment to turning over a new leaf. Despite his efforts to change, Doc was allegedly gang affiliated, particularly with the EBT set named after Eberhart Avenue. EBT was closely associated with other gangs in the area, including STL, Jarrow City, and MOB. Members of these gangs mourned Doc's death on social media, with some seemingly alluding to knowing who was responsible and vowing revenge. The police noted that these gang members held Lamron and Brick City, an older name for 600's hood, responsible for Doc's murder. In 2013, MOB Beans tweeted about doing to their enemies what Wick, a former name for O-Block, had done to Doc. Despite few hard facts being publicly known about the suspects, Chicago drill scene followers on Reddit theorized that T-Roy might be the most likely culprit in Doc's murder. This theory was based on T-Roy's reputation for aiming for the chest and targeting affiliates not directly involved in O-Block's many feuds. Additionally, there were claims that EBT EBT members discussed catching T-Roy on Facebook immediately after Doc's death. The murder of King Doc remained unsolved, but many believed it was carried out by a group of shooters from O Block, possibly including King Von and T-Roy. King Von, who would later become a notorious figure in the Chicago drill scene, started a Twitter account in the months following the murder. He openly tweeted about his friendship with T-Roy and their street activities, nonchalantly mentioning shooting people and threatening to kill. These casual admissions of violence shows the mindset of these young men, for whom murder seemed to be just another part of life. Dirty Rel. In the early morning hours of August 8, 2012, the streets of Chicago were once again stained with blood. Terrell Joshua, known on the streets as Dirty Rel, was at the corner of 56th and Wabash when he was shot multiple times. The 28-year-old man, who had moved away from Chicago years earlier to Peoria, was found motionless on the ground by police. He was rushed to the hospital but was pronounced dead around 4 a.m. The murder of Dirty Rel sent shockwaves through the community, especially among members of the STL and Jarrow City gangs with whom Rel was affiliated. The circumstances surrounding Rel's murder were shrouded in mystery. Having moved to Peoria, a city about a 2.5-hour drive from Chicago, it was unclear why Rel was in the city that night. Some speculated that he had been lured back by enemies, while others believed he had unfinished business in Chicago. Regardless of the reason, his presence in the city that night would prove fatal. T-Roy and King Von both were known for their ruthless tactics and unwavering loyalty to the O Block faction of the Black Disciples. The night before the murder, King Von ominously posted on social media about the smell of homicide in the air, implying that he might have been looking for enemies. Within hours of Rel being shot, Von posted again, showing that he was awake at the time of the murder. These posts added fuel to the fire, leading many to believe that Von and T-Roy were involved in Rel's death. Another name that emerged in connection with the case was D. Rose from 600, known to associate with O Block. A theory on the Chiricology wiki suggested that D. Rose assisted in the murder. While the exact shooter remains unknown, Rel's friends believe the murder was carried out by O Block. This theory was further supported by the fact that Rel's friends and fellow gang members mourned his death on social media, expressing their belief that O Block was responsible. The very next night, on August 8th, an O Block member named Whitey, real name Tony Dunn, was hanging out with King Von around O Block, celebrating Von's upcoming birthday. Von entered a store near the apartment complex while Whitey waited outside. It was then that Whitey was shot to death by a Jarrow City member named 50 Shot. The murder of Whitey was a direct retaliation for Rel's death, highlighting the ongoing and deadly rivalry between O Block and Jarrow City. 50 Shot was subsequently caught by police near the scene and even engaged in a shootout with the officers. It took over 10 years for justice to be served in this case. In 2023, 50 Shot was finally sentenced for the murder of Whitey and 2 attempted murders of the police officers who arrested him, receiving a 115-year sentence. This moment marked a significant turning point in the ongoing gang war, as it fueled King Von's desire for revenge. After Whitey's death, King Von began a determined campaign to kill all of O Block's enemies. He later rapped in his song Demon that witnessing Whitey's murder turned him into a demon, motivating him to commit numerous murders. Von's transformation into a relentless killer was driven by his desire to avenge his friend's death and protect his gang's territory. Modell. About 2 months after the brutal murder of Dirty Rel, another tragic event unfolded on the streets of Chicago. On a fateful night, Modell McCray, who had already experienced the trauma of finding his relative Doc dead earlier that year, was walking with his friends in STL territory. The air was thick with tension as the ongoing rivalry between O Block and STL EBT continued to escalate. Little did Modell know this night would end in bloodshed. As Modell and his friends walked through the neighborhood, a gunman approached them on foot. Without warning, the gunman opened fire, targeting Modell. In a heroic act of bravery, Modell's cousin, Miles Turner, attempted to shield him with his own body. Miles was shot multiple times in the process, but miraculously, he survived the incident. Despite his cousin's valiant efforts, Modell was not as fortunate. He succumbed to his injuries that night, leaving his family and friends devastated. King Von, real name Davon Bennett, and his best friend T-Roy, real name James Johnson. The police believed that King Von was the shooter, with T-Roy allegedly at the scene with him. Despite the police's suspicions, the investigation faced significant challenges. Many witnesses refused to speak with investigators out of fear of retaliation. This fear of speaking out is a common theme in gang-related cases where the threat of violence looms large over the community. As a result, both King Von and T-Roy were not charged for Modell's murder at the time. The lack of cooperation from witnesses meant that justice was not served, and the case remained unresolved. In the aftermath of Modell's murder, King Von and T-Roy continued to torment their rivals on social media. They seemingly bragged openly about their victims, with Von tweeting the day after the murder that he and T-Roy T-Roy just couldn't stop killing. He teased his Twitter followers to stay tuned to find out who would die next, a chilling reminder of the ongoing cycle of violence. Their brazen behavior only fueled the rivalry further, leading to more bloodshed on the streets of Chicago. Miles Turner's survival, despite being confined to a wheelchair, tells the story of bravery and resilience. His story gained attention when he met former Illinois Governor Pat Quinn to discuss surviving gang violence. Miles's heroism in attempting to save his cousin Modell adds a heartbreaking element to the story, highlighting the human cost of gang violence. His survival, however, did little to ease the pain of losing Modell, a young life cut short by senseless violence. After King Von's death in 2020, detectives finally got witnesses to come forward. With Von no longer a threat, people felt safer speaking out, leading to new revelations about the case. The investigation was ultimately closed, with Von and T-Roy determined to have been the shooters. This posthumous revelation added another layer of complexity to Von's legacy, painting him as both a feared gang member and a tragic figure caught in a cycle of violence. Boss Trell. On the morning of November 8, 2012, 17-year-old Rodney Stewart, better known as Boss Trell from STL, was found in critical condition in the Wrightwood neighborhood on the far southwest side of Chicago. He had been shot once in the back of the head and was found lying dead in a gangway with a Glock handgun tucked underneath his body. Just hours before, Boss Trell had tweeted that he was going back to sleep. So, how did he end up shot outside next to houses he seemingly had no connection to? The shooting was heard by several residents in the area, but only a few saw anything. One witness spotted a thin-built man of average height, wearing a white sweater running away from the scene. Another witness saw a black van driving away and a man wearing a hoodie, carrying a backpack, and running while yelling for help. While the police tried to piece together what had happened from these bits of information, Boss Trell was rushed to the hospital, where he fought for his life. Later that morning, Boss Trell's friends began reacting to the news of him being in the hospital. Soon, FBG Cash posted a picture on Twitter of himself holding Boss Trell's hand, along with several tweets that sounded like threats and antagonism toward those he believed shot Boss Trell. Minutes later, T-Roy and King Von began a tweet storm of their own, heartlessly mocking Boss Trell and seemingly implying their involvement in his shooting. T-Roy tweeted "man down" and Von tweeted "LOL the struggle." T-Roy even tweeted "F him, die slow" and referenced the infamous true crime show The First 48, suggesting he had just committed a murder. King Von followed up with a tweet saying that his ops weren't dying on time, referencing Boss Trell's status in the hospital. T-Roy mockingly tweeted, "No Trell, stay alive." Unfortunately, later that night, Boss Trell passed away from his injuries. Even the next day, King Von continued to taunt STL, claiming that STL stood for steady taking losses, and directly tweeted about Boss Trell, saying he wasn't a boss to him. Tragically, it was later reported that Boss Trell knew he was in danger in Chicago and had plans to move to Iowa, where he had a lead on a new job. In fact, the night he was shot, he had already bought a bus ticket to get out of town. His fears were warranted because Boss Trell was rumored to be a known shooter, with many believing he had killed for his gang, particularly Sheroid from O-Block. The same reporting suggested that many around Trell, including his girlfriend and the detectives investigating his death, knew who did it. But without credible witnesses, including Trell's girlfriend who said she didn't feel comfortable talking about the people she thought were involved, they couldn't bring any charges. Given that Von and T-Roy were heavily implying their involvement in the murder on social media, it was no surprise that the internet also believed they had something to do with it. Images even circulated of a photo T-Roy shared showing his Timberland boots covered in blood, implying that the blood may have belonged to Boss Trell. Lil James. On November 19, 2012, about 10 days after the passing of Boss Trell, a man in his 30s named James Holman, better known in the streets as Lil James or Baby J, was standing in front of his apartment. Four men reportedly exited a nearby apartment building and approached him, with at least one opening fire and hitting Holman in his forearm and chest. Holman later succumbed to his injuries at the hospital. The shooting occurred in the 6000 block of South Michigan Avenue, a territory controlled by the 600 set. Given this location, it raised immediate questions about whether people affiliated with 600 were responsible. Lil James was an alleged member of the Gangster Disciples and had ties to the MO set, a bitter enemy of 600 and their affiliates, including O-Block. In a familiar pattern, King Von and T-Roy took to social media, with Von clowning someone shortly after the shooting and later tweeting about killing GDs often. T-Roy chimed in, seemingly confirming who their target was by asking if anybody had been shot. Von's physical description matched the shooters, but this didn't prove much given his average height and weight. Other suspects included members of 600 such as Bite Down, who was rumored to have committed multiple murders, and Miko, brother of prominent 600-member D Thang. Regardless of who pulled the trigger, King Von was arrested a few days later for unlawful use of a weapon and spent over a year behind bars. This left T-Roy alone in the streets to continue their violent feud. The murder of Lil James added another layer to the already intense gang rivalry between the Gangster Disciples and O-Block. The fact that the shooting took place in a territory controlled by 600 only fueled the speculation that members of 600 or their affiliates were involved. The social media activity of King Von and T-Roy further implicated them in the eyes of the public. Von's tweets about killing GDs often, and T-Roy's inquiry about whether anybody had been shot seemed to be more than just coincidental. Stunna. The story of T-Roy's alleged involvement in the murder of Frederick Taylor, better known as Stunna, is a chilling chapter in the violent saga of Chicago's gang wars. Stunna was a 27-year-old member of the TTB, Trained to Blow gang, which operated from the north side of Washington Park. Despite the geographical distance from O-Block, TTB had forged alliances with many of O-Block's enemies, making them a prime target. The events leading up to Stunna's death began on the night of June 8, 2013. Stunna was driving with friends on the Dan Ryan Expressway, a major highway that cuts through the heart of Chicago. It was around 1 o'clock in the morning when their car came under a hail of bullets. The assailants' aim was deadly. Stunna and a woman in the car were hit, while a third passenger miraculously escaped unscathed. The car swerved and came to a stop, and the chaos of the moment was palpable. Stunna was rushed to the hospital, but despite the efforts of medical staff, he was pronounced dead the next day. The immediate aftermath of the shooting saw a flurry of accusations and threats. TTB members, including a prominent figure known as TTB Nez, took to social media to express their grief and anger. Tweets were filled with ominous messages and vows of revenge, with many pointing fingers directly at O-Block. The tension was thick, and the streets buzzed with rumors and speculation. One of the most telling pieces of evidence that fueled the suspicion towards T-Roy was his sudden absence from social media following the shooting. In the digital age, where gang members often flaunt their activities online, T-Roy's silence was deafening. Adding to the intrigue was a tweet from FBG Duck, a well-known figure in the Chicago rap scene and a rival of O-Block. Duck's tweet implied that T-Roy had been in jail, a statement that only added to the swirling rumors. As the weeks turned into months, the animosity between TTB and O-Block only grew. TTB members continued to blame O-Block for Stunna's death, directing their ire towards prominent members like Boss Top and T-Roy. The online exchanges were filled with threats and taunts, each side daring the other to make a move. In one particularly provocative video, T-Roy was seen toting a gun and taunting his enemies, a brazen display that further fueled the accusations against him.
They would not stun me. No, I keep that 33.
The murder of Stunna was not just another statistic in the ongoing gang violence. It was a significant event that had far-reaching implications. Stunna was not just a gang member. He was a beloved figure within TTB, and his death left a void that was felt deeply by his friends and family. The emotional toll was immense, and the desire for revenge was palpable. Billy Sargent. The alleged murder of 67-year-old Billy Sargent is one of the most tragic and perplexing episodes in the violent chronicles of T-Roy's life. This incident, which unfolded on the morning of September 17, 2013, stands out not only for its brutality, but also for the age and innocence of the victim, making it a particularly heart-wrenching chapter in the story of Chicago's gang wars. Billy Sargent was an elderly man, far removed from the gang conflicts that plagued his neighborhood. On that fateful morning, he was simply sitting at a bus shelter near 61st and King Drive, a routine part of his day. The peacefulness of the moment was shattered when someone opened fire, hitting Sargent multiple times. The sudden eruption of violence left the community in shock. Sargent was quickly taken to the hospital, but despite the best efforts of medical professionals, he did not survive his injuries. Witnesses at the scene reported seeing a young boy, estimated to be around 14 to 15 years old, fleeing the area immediately after the shooting. This detail added a layer of complexity to the case, as it suggested the involvement of a very young suspect. The police acted swiftly, capturing and interviewing a suspect who matched the description. However, the boy was released shortly after due to a solid alibi, leaving the case wide open and the community desperate for answers. The very next day, T-Roy was arrested for criminal trespassing. On the surface, the charges seemed unrelated to the shooting of Billy Sargent. However, the timing of the arrest was suspicious and led to rampant speculation. Many began to wonder if T-Roy's arrest was a strategic move by law enforcement to keep him off the streets while they investigated the murder. The rumors were further fueled by the fact that this incident occurred shortly after the murder of Jay Money, a beloved beloved member of O-Block. J Money's death had sent shockwaves through O-Block, and the desire for revenge was palpable. Some speculated that T-Roy, in his quest for retribution, had targeted rival gang member K.I., but had mistakenly killed Billy Sargent instead. This theory, while unconfirmed, added a tragic layer to the story, suggesting that an innocent man had lost his life in a case of mistaken identity.
He was the last person on earth that should ever get shot for sitting on the corner. All the old gangsters, boys, they knew him. This was somebody that was just, I don't know, man. I don't know. That's a shame.
The murder of Billy Sargent was a reminder of the collateral damage that often accompanies gang violence. Sargent was not involved in gang activities. He was an innocent bystander caught in the crossfire of a deadly feud. His death highlighted the indiscriminate nature of gang violence and the devastating impact it can have on the broader community. Lil Mark. The year 2014 began on a gloomy note for T-Roy. In early January, he was arrested on a warrant, likely stemming from previous legal trouble. This arrest was a significant blow to O-Block, as T-Roy was one of their most feared enforcers. However, the streets of Chicago are unpredictable, and by February, both T-Roy and King Von were back on the streets, ready to reclaim their territory and seek vengeance for their fallen comrades. The O-Block and 600 Alliance had suffered devastating losses. L.A. Capone, a rising star in the rap scene, was gunned down in 2013. J Money, another prominent figure, met a similar fate. These murders left a void in the gang, and the thirst for revenge was palpable. The streets were buzzing with tension, and it was only a matter of time before the next act of violence erupted. In March 2014, the simmering tensions reached a boiling point. 051 Young Money's biggest rapper, Lil Mark, released a diss track that sent shockwaves through the gang community. The track was a direct attack on O-Block, 600, Lamron, and their allies. Lil Mark's lyrics were a blatant provocation, mocking the deaths of L.A. Capone and J Money, and challenging the very core of O-Block's pride. Just days after the release of the diss track, the streets of Chicago witnessed another brutal act of violence. Lil Mark was standing at a bus stop when a silver van pulled up. Without warning, someone inside the van opened fire, hitting Lil Mark in the head and killing him instantly. The scene was chaotic, with witnesses describing the shooter as having an extended clip, but unable to see their face. The murder was swift, brutal, and left no doubt about its message. Hours after the shooting, the police discovered the van used in the murder, engulfed in flames. The evidence was destroyed, but the implications were clear. The streets were buzzing with speculation, and fingers were quickly pointed at O-Block. King Von, T-Roy, and other members of O-Block wasted no time in taking to social media to mock Lil Mark's death. Their posts were filled with taunts and celebrations, further fueling the animosity between the rival gangs. In a brazen display of defiance, King Von, T-Roy, and D-Rose from 600 were seen driving past the crime scene, their presence a chilling reminder of the ongoing feud. Despite the celebrations and accusations from 051 Young Money members, the case remains unsolved. The murder of Lil Mark was a turning point, escalating the violence to new heights and setting the stage for further bloodshed. The murder of Lil Mark was not just another killing, it was a statement. For T-Roy and King Von, it was a demonstration of their power and a warning to their enemies. But in the world of gang warfare, every action has a reaction. The cycle of violence continued, with each murder fueling the next. T-Roy and King Von's involvement in Lil Mark's death not only solidified their reputations as ruthless enforcers, but also painted a target on their backs. For more content like this, click on the videos showing on your screen now.